class, we will address the solution of the exercise on job order costing. If we look at the text, we have this data. We have a company that realizes wooden toys that passes through 3 different departments. If we look at the text, we have some data about the overheads in the first 2 tables, and then we have some data about the square meters of each of the 3 departments. What is required by the text are 2 different things. The first one is to calculate the overheads within each of the 3 departments, while the second requirement is to calculate the overall cost of a job, given some specific details on our job, and the details of the job are provided in table number 4. Now, let's start from the first requirement, which is to calculate the total overheads within each of the 3 departments. What we have to do is to distinguish between the overheads that can be directly traced to the departments, while to identify those overheads that need to be allocated to the departments. There are some data, if we look at the text, that can be directly traced to the department, because we know by reading the text that machines are just within the machining departments. So we have basically 2 informations which are, and we have basically 2 different information that are the electricity to power machine and the depreciation about the machine, that of course are related to the machines, which means that we can directly trace these 2 different overheads within the machining department. And these values, as are provided in the first table of the text, are the following. We have the electricity to power machine, whose value is 100 euros. Then we have the second data about the depreciation, again provided by the text, which is 200 euros. Now we have some other data which again can be traced to each of the 3 departments. This data is about the cost of the indirect workers. Again, we have the value of the indirect workers within each of the department. So this data, these costs, can be directly traced to the 3 departments. Again, these data are exactly provided in table number 2, so we can just assign this value to the 3 different departments. We have 2,000 euros, which is the value of the indirect workers within the machining department. Then we have 2,400, which is the value assigned to the machining department. And then we have the value that can be assigned to the finishing department, which is 1,800. Now we have the 4 categories of indirect cost that is represented by the rent and the cleaning. In this case, we do not have the specific value within each of the 3 departments, but we are required to allocate the value of both the rent and the cleaning by using an allocation approach. Again, in order to allocate the value of the rent and the cleaning, we need to identify an allocation basis and then an allocation coefficient. What could be the allocation basis? If we think of rent and cleaning, we can use the square meter in order to assign their value among the 3 different departments. So basically we can calculate K as the ratio between the total overheads that we need to assign, which is 1,000 euro, that is the value of the rent, plus 60 euros, which is the value of the cleaning. If we divide this total overhead by the total number of square meter, that is 40,000, as provided by the sum of the square meter that are written in table number 3, we can calculate the value of K, and the value of K is 0.0265. This is the value of the allocation coefficient, the euro per square meter. If we then multiply this K by the number of square meter of each of the 3 departments, we can define the overhead assigned to each of the departments. So we will have 397 euros 0.5, which is the value of rent and cleaning assigned to the preparation department. Then we can identify the value that is assigned to the machining department, again by multiplying K by the number of square meter of the machining department. So we will have 530 euros. And finally, we can do the same with the finishing department by multiplying the value of K by the number of square meters. So we will have 132.5. After doing this, if we just sum the values of each column, we can identify the total value of the overheads, which can be assigned to each of the 3 departments. So the total value of the overheads will be the following. We will have 2,000 euros, 397.5, which is the value of the overheads in the preparation department. If we do the same for the machining department, we will have 3,000 euros 230. And finally, we can calculate the value of the overhead within the finishing department, which is 1,932.5. In this way, we have addressed the first requirement of the exercise, which means that we have calculated the value of the overhead within each of the three departments. The second requirement of the exercise is to calculate the overall cost of a job. We have specific data on a job in table number 4, and this job passes through the three different departments. We have the value of the direct material, direct labor, and we need to address the overall cost of this job. If we think of the structure of a job order costing approach, direct material and direct labor can be traced directly to our job. Specifically, with respect to the direct material, the value of the direct material that have been absorbed by the job within each of the department is something that is already provided by the text. So we have 85 euros, 13 euros, and then 6 euros, so that the total value of the direct material absorbed by the job is 104 euros. We need now to trace the value of the direct labor to the job in each of the three departments. If we look at the data that we have in the last table, we do not have the value of the direct labor, but we know the direct labor hours that are absorbed by our job. So if we multiply the direct labor hours by the cost of 1 hour, we can identify the value of the direct labor absorbed by the job. So let's do this for the department of the preparation. We have that the direct labor hours absorbed by the job in the preparation department are 10. If we multiply these 10 hours by the cost of 1 hour of work, which is 12 euros, we can identify 120 euros, which is the cost of the direct labor traced to the preparation department. We can do the same for the machining department. Again, if we multiply 7 hours, which are the direct labor hours, by 12, which are the cost of 1 hour of work, we identify 84 euros, which is the direct labor traced to the machining department. Finally, if we do the same for the finishing department, we have 5 hours of direct labor hours multiplied by 12 euros per hour, so that we have 60 euros, which is the direct labor traced to the finishing department. If we sum these, we identify that the total cost of the direct labor absorbed by our job is 264 euros. So we have traced direct material and direct labor. We need now to move to the overhead, because we need to allocate the overhead of each department to our job. How can we allocate the value of this overhead to our job? Again, by calculating K. The formula of K is always the same. We need to divide the total overhead by an allocation basis. So let's start by calculating K for the preparation department. The total overhead is this value, 2,397.5. We need to identify the allocation basis. What's the allocation basis for the preparation department? This is something that is given by the text, because they say that in the preparation department, the direct labor hours is the allocation basis that is used. What's the total value of the direct labor hours within the preparation department? We have that every direct worker works 160 hours. If we multiply these 160 hours by the number of workers that we have within the preparation department, that is 6, we can identify the value of our allocation basis. So if we divide the total overhead by the total direct labor hours given by 160 hours by 6 workers, we can identify the value of K within the preparation department, that is 2.49 euros per hour. Now, if we multiply this value, which is our allocation coefficient, by the number of direct labor hours that are absorbed by our job, that is 10 hours, we can identify the value of the overhead that is absorbed by our job within the preparation department. So basically, this value is 24.97 euros. We need now to repeat this approach of calculating K in the remaining 2 different departments. So we can do this for the machining department. Now we need again to calculate K. In this case, again, we need to divide the total overhead, so this value, by the allocation basis. But the allocation basis for the machining department is represented by the number of machine hours. It is written again in the final table of the text. What's the total number of machine hours within the machining department. This value is 1000 hours. So if we divide this value by 1000 hours, we can identify the value of K of 3.23 euros per hour. Again, if we multiply the value of K by the number of machine hours absorbed by our job, which is 8 hours, these are the machine hours absorbed by our job in the machining department, we identify the value of the overhead that is assigned within the machining department, that is 25.84 euros. Let's do this also for the finishing department. So again, we need to calculate K. The approach is the same, the total overhead divided by the allocation basis. In this case, the allocation basis is the same that we had for the preparation department, so the direct labor hours overall within the finishing department. So if we divide the total overhead, so this value, by the total direct labor hours within the finishing department, which is 160 hours per each worker, multiplied by 5 workers that we have within the finishing department, this ratio provides an allocation coefficient K of 2.41 euros per hour. Again, if we multiply this K by the direct labor hours absorbed by our job within the finishing department, that is 5, we can identify a value of 12.07, that is the portion of these overheads that have been absorbed by our job within the finishing department. If we sum the value of the overheads which have been absorbed by our job, we can identify a value of 62.88 euros. And basically at this point we have traced the value of direct material, direct labor and overhead. If we sum them, we can identify the total cost that have been absorbed by our job. So our job overall have absorbed an amount of resources whose value is equal to 430 euros.88. So that's the value of the resources that have been absorbed by our job. We can also calculate, if we want, the cost of one unit within our job by dividing this total value by the number of units that composes our job, that in this case is something that is not provided. So that's the overall approach. So keep in mind the distinction between the tracing of costs and then the allocation that occurs by calculating K by dividing the total overhead by a total allocation basis.